There comes a moment when you realize that control was never peace. It was a performance, a constant tightening of the mind around reality, trying to hold what was never meant to be held. You believe control would protect you from pain, uncertainty, or loss, but it only protected you from life itself. Every time you tried to predict, fix, or manage what unfolds, you silence the intelligence that knows what to do without you. Life moves on its own rhythm, precise, effortless, and vast beyond comprehension. And the moment you stop gripping the wheel, you feel that rhythm begin to breathe through you again. Control is tension disguised as safety. It's the nervous system's old contract with fear, the body's way of saying, if I stay alert, nothing bad will happen. Yet life has never needed your alertness to function. The sun rises without your permission. The heart beats without your command. The breath flows in and out, indifferent to your control. And in this quiet recognition, a deeper truth begins to form. The universe has never once asked for your supervision. When you stop controlling, the body loosens first. The chest expands. The breath returns. You feel something ancient stirring inside you, an intelligence that was always there, hidden beneath layers of vigilance. You're not making life happen. You're being lived by it. The flow that once felt distant begins to return, like water remembering its path back to the ocean. This is not surrender as defeat. It's surrender as alignment. The letting go of control is not the collapse of willpower. It's the release of resistance. It's saying yes to what already is. Yes to the way your life has always been guided. You were never meant to wrestle with the tide. You were meant to move with it. The mind tries to hold things still because it fears change. But stillness is not the absence of motion. It's the awareness within motion. When you let go of control, you don't fall apart. You fall into harmony. The same intelligence that grows trees, heals wounds, and spins galaxies begins to move through your gestures, your choices, your timing. Life becomes choreography. And you, the dancer who finally stops rehearsing. The truth is simple. Control is born from distrust. It's the ego's desperate attempt to replace divine timing with personal management. But every plan, every forecast, every mental checklist is a kind of subtle resistance to the unknown. And the unknown is where all creativity, love, and expansion dwell. You cannot plan awakening. You can only stop interfering with it. When control ends, presence begins. You start hearing what was always speaking, the quiet hum beneath thought, the pulse of existence itself. You notice how life keeps balancing itself without your input. The nervous system, once bound in loops of overanalysis, begins to recalibrate. You feel less need to prove, fix, or predict. You trust that what's meant for you cannot be missed because you are no longer standing in your own way. Letting go of control is not about abandoning structure. It's about realizing structure was never the source of order. True order arises from awareness, the calm coherence that naturally forms when you're in tune with the moment. You can still act, decide, move, and create, but the energy behind it shifts. There's no grasping, no strain, no pressure. There's only flow. You start to sense that control was not keeping life steady. It was keeping it stagnant. Like a river dammed by fear, your energy had been trapped in patterns of defense. But once the dam cracks open, the current rushes forward. Everything begins to find its rightful place. Relationships, timing, opportunities, all align with an ease that no strategy could have designed. This is what happens when control ends. The self that tried to manage life dissolves, and what remains is a clarity that cannot be described but can be felt. It feels like exhaling after years of holding your breath. It feels like finally trusting gravity to hold you. It feels like remembering that life was never separate from you. It was always you, unfolding perfectly. In this awareness, effort transforms into flow. Doing transforms into being. You no longer need to make life happen. You simply allow life to happen through you. And what flows through you is intelligent beyond measure. It brings the right people, the right lessons, the right pauses. It cleanses, rearranges, and awakens everything that's ready to evolve. When you stop controlling, you stop resisting the natural intelligence of your own consciousness. You realize that your nervous system was never meant to carry the weight of the world. It was meant to feel its rhythm. Control was a way of numbing that rhythm, muting its wisdom, trying to substitute logic for trust. But life is not a problem to solve. It's a current to join. The moment control ends, your perception changes. You begin to see that uncertainty was never chaos. It was freedom. It was the space where the universe could finally breathe on your behalf. And in that breathing, you rediscover something profound. You were never meant to master life. You were meant to merge with it. Stillness arrives not when you stop moving, but when movement and awareness become one. The inner and outer no longer feel separate. The nervous system softens, the mind clears, the heart steadies, and you begin to feel, not think, but feel, that every breath carries divine precision. The control you thought was keeping you safe was keeping you small. But now, standing in this space of surrender, you can finally see what safety really is. It's not prediction, it's participation. It's not certainty, it's connection. It's not control, it's communion. You were never supposed to micromanage the mystery. You were meant to dissolve into it, and as you do, life begins to move through you again. Gently, purposefully, endlessly. This is the moment control ends, and the moment life begins. The mind loves the idea of control because it gives the illusion of mastery. It whispers that if you plan enough, predict enough, and try hard enough, you will finally feel safe. It tells you that certainty equals peace, but that voice is not truth. It is fear disguised as logic. Control becomes a false comfort, a mental armor built to keep chaos away. Yet, in that armor, you can't breathe. You can't move. You can't flow. The illusion of mastery begins with the belief that life is an equation to be solved, that if you just think hard enough, you can outsmart uncertainty. But uncertainty isn't an error in the system. It is the system. The mystery isn't something to fix. It's something to trust. The more you chase control, the more you separate yourself from the natural rhythm of existence. You begin to mistake vigilance for wisdom, tension for strength, exhaustion for purpose. This is how the modern mind lives, overstimulated, under-trusting. The nervous system hums on high alert, scanning for what might go wrong. The mind calls this preparation. The body calls it survival. You start living in a subtle war against what is, constantly adjusting, managing, and defending yourself from an invisible threat that never arrives. Control becomes your identity. But control is not mastery. It is a substitute for faith. It's the ego's way of saying, I do not trust the intelligence that created me. And this mistrust is woven deeply into our conditioning. From a young age, you were taught that success meant domination. Over time, over emotions, over uncertainty. You were rewarded for performance, for composure, for knowing what comes next. No one told you that peace was not found in control, but in surrender. The mind confuses order with ownership. It believes that by managing every variable, it becomes the creator of life. Yet, what it creates is pressure. You start to feel that if you ever stop trying, everything will collapse. But that collapse is only the ego's fear of disappearing. It doesn't realize that when effort ceases, life doesn't fall apart. It begins to realign. The illusion of mastery also hides in perfectionism, the endless polishing of identity to avoid rejection or failure. It's the belief that if you appear flawless, you will finally be safe from chaos. But perfectionism is another form of control, born from shame. It's the mind's way of protecting the wounded parts of you that once felt powerless. The more you strive to be perfect, the further you drift from authenticity. The nervous system mirrors this illusion. When the mind demands control, the body responds with tension. Shoulders rise, breath shortens, muscles tighten. You mistake this tightening for readiness, but it's actually fear preparing for battle. The body becomes a battlefield where presence cannot land. You live in anticipation, never in experience. And yet, there's a paradox here. The harder you try to control life, the more life resists you. The moment you force energy, it contracts. You can feel it. The heaviness, the friction, the subtle drain. Energy does not flow through control. It flows through coherence. And coherence requires trust. The illusion of mastery tells you to push harder when things don't flow. But flow begins the instant you stop pushing. Control is seductive because it offers a sense of agency. It makes you feel powerful, capable, in charge. But true power doesn't come from dominance. It comes from alignment. The more you cling to outcomes, the more fragile your peace becomes. You start living in loops of anxiety, waiting for confirmation that everything will go as planned. But life was never meant to follow plans. It was meant to unfold through participation. The mind measures mastery by how well it can predict the future. Awareness measures mastery by how deeply it can inhabit the present. One is about manipulation. The other is about integration. One tightens. The other expands. Control says, I must manage. Consciousness says, I must allow. And between those two voices lies the entire human struggle. We have built societies around control, systems, deadlines, measurements, and goals, all designed to protect us from uncertainty. But the cost of this illusion is spiritual fatigue. We lose intimacy with life itself. We forget how to feel the pulse beneath the plan. The need to control becomes a collective addiction, fed by fear and reinforced by culture. We call it success. We call it productivity. But what it truly is fear. Fear that if we let go, we will lose everything. You begin to notice how control shows up in subtle ways. You try to control conversations so no one misunderstands you. You control timing, trying to rush or delay outcomes. You control your emotions so you won't seem weak. You even control your spiritual growth, measuring progress, comparing awakenings, grading your peace. But spirituality does not bloom under management. It blooms under surrender. The truth is that control is not mastery. It's resistance. And resistance is what keeps energy stuck. The moment you stop trying to be the master of life, life begins to master itself through you. It doesn't need your constant analysis. It needs your permission to move. The same intelligence that turns a seed into a tree, that orchestrates seasons, that heals wounds, knows exactly what to do in your life, but only when you stop interfering. When you let go of control, you don't lose direction. You gain alignment. You stop swimming against the current and begin moving with it. You start realizing that the flow of life is not something to manipulate, but something to trust. You understand that real mastery is not about predicting outcomes, but about dancing with them. The illusion of mastery is the mind's attempt to replace wonder with certainty. But wonder is the language of the soul. When you live in control, you silence that language. You become a closed system, looping between fear and effort. When you surrender, the system opens again. Energy begins to circulate. Insight arrives without force. Timing aligns without pressure. The truth of mastery is different from the illusion. The illusion says, I am the one who directs. The truth says, I am the one who allows. The illusion clings to outcomes. The truth lives in observation. The illusion fears loss. The truth knows nothing real can be lost. As this awareness grows, you begin to see control for what it is. A story your nervous system learned to tell, to feel safe. But stories are not reality. They are echoes of conditioning, projections of fear. And as that story dissolves, something more intelligent begins to emerge. Not a mind that manages life, but a consciousness that participates in it fully. The illusion of mastery breaks the moment you stop believing that control equals safety. Safety comes from coherence, when your inner state no longer fights the outer world, when body and mind rest in the same frequency, when your awareness trusts life enough to stop performing its defense. That is real mastery, not command, but communion. You don't need to manage life to live well. You need only to remember that life already knows what it's doing. The same intelligence that formed your heartbeat is guiding every outcome. The same rhythm that moves oceans moves through you. And when you stop pretending to control it, you finally begin to feel its power. Control was never the answer. Awareness is. And when the illusion dissolves, you no longer need to hold everything together. It's because you realize it was never falling apart. Life was simply waiting for you to stop managing it and start trusting it. There comes a quiet turning point when something within you begins to question everything the mind has built, not through logic, but through exhaustion. You reach the edge of your own control and see that all your effort has not brought peace, only fatigue disguised as achievement. And in that moment of still awareness, a crack forms in the illusion, a small space where a deeper intelligence begins to whisper, what if life was never meant to be controlled, but observed? This is the shift, subtle but irreversible. The axis of consciousness begins to tilt. The same mind that once tried to dominate reality now starts to see its limits. It begins to understand that life does not respond to control. It responds to coherence. You realize that your thoughts, emotions, and actions were never separate from the flow you tried to manage. They were part of the flow itself. It's like stepping out of a storm you didn't know you were standing in. The noise of the mind, all its plans, fears, and predictions, quiets for a moment. You feel something different moving underneath. A pulse, a rhythm, a presence that does not demand anything, but simply invites you to listen. And the more you listen, the more you understand. Life has always been speaking. It's your control that made you deaf. You begin to perceive that your suffering was not caused by life's unpredictability, but by your resistance to it. The pain was never in what happened. It was in the tension of trying to make it different. Every anxious thought, every need to fix or manage, was the nervous system's attempt to rewrite the script of reality. And yet, reality was never the enemy. It was your teacher. It was showing you, moment after moment, that peace only arises when you stop arguing with what is. This realization does not arrive as an idea. It arrives as a felt sense. The body begins to release its grip, the breath deepens, the mind softens. You feel, for the first time, that maybe you don't have to think your way through existence. Maybe you can feel your way through it. Maybe awareness itself is intelligent enough to lead you where you need to be. The shift in perception is not dramatic. It's not a burst of enlightenment or a thunderclap of revelation. It's quiet, like the moment a river changes course without resistance. You begin to notice patterns dissolving. You no longer chase outcomes with the same desperation. You no longer believe every thought that screams for control. You begin to sense the gap between awareness and thought, and in that gap, peace begins to live. You start to realize that control was not clarity, it was noise. It was the nervous system's way of staying busy, pretending that effort equals progress. But true progress happens in stillness. True transformation happens when you stop managing energy and start aligning with it. You start to feel the energetic difference between forcing and flowing. Forcing feels like contraction. Flowing feels like breath. One drains, the other restores. And so the perception shifts from the belief that you are a separate self trying to survive a chaotic world to the recognition that you are consciousness experiencing itself through this world. The ego says, I am doing life. Awareness says, life is doing me. That small rearrangement of perspective changes everything. It's the same reality, but now you meet it without tension. You start to see that control was always based on fear, and fear cannot exist where trust has entered. The nervous system begins to recalibrate in this awareness. When you stop interpreting uncertainty as danger, the body no longer needs to brace for impact. The fight or flight softens into rest and receive. The energy that was once trapped in vigilance starts to move toward creativity, intuition, and peace. You start feeling instead of predicting. You start responding instead of reacting. The nervous system, once a cage of protection, becomes a bridge of communication between you and life itself. In this new perception, surrender is no longer a loss of power, it is the recognition of true power. You see that control was only a symptom of mistrust, a misunderstanding between the mind and the soul. The mind thought it had to do everything alone. The soul has always known it was never separate. The shift happens when those two parts begin to reconcile, when thought bows to awareness, and awareness takes its rightful place as the observer, not the prisoner, of experience. There's a stillness in this perception that the old mind cannot comprehend. It feels like spaciousness, like permission, like remembering who you are beyond the constant effort to maintain a version of yourself. The you that needed to control begins to fade. The you that observes begins to awaken. And this awakening is not intellectual. It is energetic. It vibrates in the heart more than it explains itself in the head. The shift in perception reveals that control was always backwards. You were trying to manage what was already perfectly managed by the intelligence of life. The same intelligence that synchronizes breath and heartbeat, that grows forests and stars, has never once lost track of your path. The only thing ever in the way was your insistence on steering. When you release that insistence, life begins to move through you with precision. Everything you once tried to make happen starts unfolding naturally, as though it had been waiting for your permission to breathe. This new way of seeing is not passive. It's deeply participatory, but from a place of harmony, not compulsion. You still act, but your actions emerge from clarity, not anxiety. You still make choices, but your choices arise from intuition, not fear. You no longer need to manipulate time or force results. You trust the unfolding, even when it moves slower or stranger than you imagined. Because now, you understand that life is not testing you. It's synchronizing with you. The shift also reveals how perception shapes reality. When you believed life was chaotic, you saw chaos everywhere. When you begin to trust life, you start noticing order beneath every experience. Not the mechanical kind of order that control tries to build, but a living, breathing intelligence. The right words appear at the right time. The right opportunities open with less effort. Even the challenges come as precision lessons, not punishments, but calibrations. The more you witness this, the more the illusion of control dissolves. You start to understand that the universe has always been self-regulating, and you were never keeping it together. You were only interrupting its natural balance. And as this understanding deepens, the mind finally exhales. The old program of, "I must fix everything," fades, replaced by a quiet trust that everything is already unfolding toward balance. From this space, perception no longer feels fragmented. You no longer see life in parts, good and bad, success and failure, control and chaos. You see movement, rhythm, and evolution. You begin to sense that everything is doing what it must to expand consciousness. You stop taking life personally. You start participating impersonally, not detached, but deeply connected. And so the shift is complete. You're no longer a manager of existence. You are an instrument of it. Thoughts lose their authority. Fear loses its power. And what remains is awareness. Vast, steady, and quiet. You see now that letting go was never the end of control. It was the beginning of clarity. The moment perception shifts, life doesn't change. Your relationship to it does. You stop trying to shape the river, and you start becoming the river. You stop resisting the unknown, and you start recognizing it as home. Control fades into trust, and in that trust, the energy of life begins to flow unobstructed through every cell, every breath, every moment. The shift is not about learning something new. It's about remembering what has always been true. Life knows what it's doing, and now, finally, you can see it. There comes a moment when you are no longer fighting with yourself, not because you have won, but because you have stopped needing to. This is the point of surrender, the quiet threshold where the mind's endless struggle collapses into the arms of awareness. You realize that nothing you have ever forced has brought peace. Every time you try to control, it was only your nervous system trying to survive a reality it did not yet trust. But survival is not the same as living. And the body, weary from tension, begins to understand this. Surrender does not arrive with a grand gesture. It arrives in silence, like a soft exhale after years of holding your breath. You notice that the tightness in your chest, the racing in your thoughts, the constant need to predict begins to loosen. It's as if life itself has been waiting for this precise moment, the instant when you finally let it carry you. You realize that what you called control was simply resistance, and what you called surrender was always your natural state. This point of surrender is not resignation. It is awakening. It's the recognition that life was never against you, only misunderstood by the part of you that feared losing control. The ego resists this truth because it believes that surrender means disappearance. But the truth is the opposite. When you surrender, you don't vanish. You become vast. You expand beyond the boundaries of control into a field of intelligence that is already guiding everything. The nervous system feels this shift before the mind does. You can sense it in the way your breath deepens, in the way your shoulders drop without you trying. The body begins to release the memory of control, the constant fight, the endless bracing, the invisible war against uncertainty. You start to feel something different, safety, not because everything is certain, but because you realize certainty was never needed. Surrender begins when the nervous system no longer interprets uncertainty as danger. When the body understands that not knowing is not a threat, it becomes a doorway. This is the biological dimension of awakening. The moment your physiology aligns with truth, your cells, your heartbeat, your breath, all begin to move in coherence with the present moment. You are no longer preparing for life, you are participating in it. The mind, however, resists. It tries to pull you back into the old rhythm of control, analyzing, comparing, predicting. It asks, if I stop controlling, who will protect me? But awareness doesn't need protection. It is the protector. It watches the mind's panic with compassion, not correction. It allows every thought to rise and fall without interference. And slowly, through observation, the mind realizes it cannot command the flow. It can only distort it. This is where true surrender happens. Not in a single act of letting go, but in a continuous returning to trust. Every moment, every breath becomes a decision to stop interfering with what is unfolding. You begin to understand that surrender is not an event, it's a frequency. It is a state of energetic alignment where the mind relaxes into the intelligence of being. In this frequency, action still happens, but it happens without strain. Movement arises, choices unfold, words are spoken, but there is no sense of, I am the doer. There is only doing, only life expressing itself through the vessel of awareness. You notice that what once required planning now happens effortlessly. What once felt heavy now feels inevitable. You don't push, you flow. You don't react, you respond. Everything begins to move in harmony with an unseen rhythm that has always been there. At the point of surrender, identity begins to dissolve. The me that believed it could control reality begins to fade like mist in morning light. This can feel disorienting at first, like losing something familiar. But soon, you realize what's disappearing is not you. It's the false center that tried to replace life's intelligence with its own. What remains is awareness, vast calm, and deeply alive. You are not losing yourself, you are remembering yourself. The nervous system, once conditioned to defend, begins to recalibrate around safety and stillness. You realize that relaxation is not weakness, it is receptivity. It allows energy to flow where it needs to go. The old patterns of resistance, of pushing and forcing, start to unravel. You begin to trust that everything arrives on time, not because you manage it, but because you're aligned with it. Surrender does not mean you stop caring. It means you stop carrying. You stop holding the world on your shoulders and start letting it rest in your awareness. You no longer confuse responsibility with burden. You see that your only true responsibility is your state of being. From that alignment, everything else organizes naturally. Conversations, relationships, timing, all begin to harmonize without manipulation. This point of surrender also reveals a deeper intelligence within the psyche. The part of you that once demanded control was not the enemy. It was the wounded protector. It feared surrender because it mistook control for love. It believed that managing every detail was the way to stay safe. When awareness meets this part with compassion, not judgment, the protector softens. It learns that it can rest now, that awareness has always been holding everything together. You begin to experience what the mystics call the effortless effort. Life still moves through you. Work, decisions, emotions, relationships, but it all feels lighter. You start responding from intuition, not strategy. You act without overthinking, and the timing feels precise, like the universe itself is guiding your movements. You don't chase opportunities, they arrive. You don't force healing, it unfolds. You don't demand clarity, it emerges. This is the natural order of surrender. In this state, even discomfort becomes sacred. You no longer resist emotion. You allow it to pass through like weather. Fear, anger, grief, all are seen as energies seeking release, not problems to solve. The more you allow them, the more they transform. Emotion turns into information. Pain turns into power. The nervous system learns that flow includes everything, even turbulence, and that realization deepens surrender even more. The mind that once sought control begins to serve awareness instead of ruling it. It becomes an instrument of clarity rather than confusion. You no longer believe every thought that arises. You begin to watch thoughts like clouds passing through the sky of consciousness, temporary, harmless, fleeting. What remains constant is the vastness of awareness itself. The more you rest in that vastness, the less control you need. At this point, surrender becomes natural. You don't have to practice it, you simply stop resisting life. The nervous system learns to trust stillness as its baseline. The body feels lighter, grounded, and alive. The mind becomes quiet, no longer driven by the endless need to fix or explain. And awareness, your true nature, shines unobstructed, timeless, peaceful, unshaken. Surrender is not something you achieve. It's what's revealed when the noise of control fades. It's the return to your natural state. Awareness resting in awareness. The world continues to move, but you are no longer caught in its momentum. You move with it, not against it. You breathe with it, not around it. You finally understand that nothing real was ever in your control, and nothing real was ever out of alignment. This is the point of surrender, the end of effort, the beginning of flow, a sacred pause in which life takes over, not as something separate from you, but as the truest expression of who you are. When you stop fighting the current, you realize you were never in the river. You were the water all along. There's an intelligence moving through everything, subtle, precise, and infinitely wise. You can call it life, spirit, consciousness, or simply flow. It doesn't need to be managed, because it is already orchestrating everything with perfect timing. Every heartbeat, every inhale, every coincidence you could never have planned. All of it moves according to this silent order. The moment you stop trying to control it, you begin to feel it working through you. This flow intelligence is not separate from you. It is you, the deeper field of awareness that animates thought, breath, and motion. It is the same force that moves oceans and galaxies, pulsing quietly in your nervous system. The mind cannot understand it, but the body can feel it. It's the warmth behind intuition, the calm beneath uncertainty, the effortless unfolding that happens when you stop interfering. When you align with this intelligence, you don't abandon thought, you transcend it. Thought becomes a tool, not a master. You begin to act from clarity instead of compulsion, from resonance instead of reaction. The nervous system softens and life starts to synchronize with your state of being. People, timing, and opportunities begin to align not because you force them to, but because you match the frequency of coherence. Flow intelligence speaks in simplicity. It doesn't rush. It doesn't overthink. It moves with rhythm, with seasons, with divine timing. It understands when to pause and when to move. And when you listen closely, you realize that this intelligence is never uncertain. Only the mind is. The flow knows the way, even when the path is hidden. Science calls it homeostasis. Spirituality calls it divine order. But both point to the same truth. Life seeks balance, always. The nervous system mirrors this law. When you resist, it tenses. When you trust, it regulates. When you surrender, it harmonizes. This is not magic. It's biology, attuned to consciousness. You begin to sense that your role is not to direct life, but to align with it. The body becomes a channel, not a cage. The heart becomes the compass, not the prisoner of emotion. You stop demanding control, because you can feel the current of intelligence guiding you through every moment. There's no more need to push, only to participate. This is the nature of flow, effortless precision. The more you trust it, the clearer it becomes. The more you interfere, the more chaotic it feels. Flow requires one thing only, your willingness to stop pretending you know better than life. When you honor this intelligence, everything begins to unfold exactly as it should. You're not moving through life. Life is moving through you. The current that beats your heart is the same current that shapes the stars. And when you finally allow it, you realize this intelligence was never absent. You were only too busy controlling to hear it speak. The moment surrender deepens, something begins to dissolve. The false sense of I that once tried to command the universe. The ego, built from stories and fears, begins to lose its gravity. You feel it in the quiet spaces between thoughts, in the gaps where effort disappears. It's not destruction, it's softening. The walls of identity, once rigid and loud, start to melt into the rhythm of flow. The ego thrives on separation. It survives by dividing life into me and everything else. But when awareness awakens, those borders blur. You start to sense that energy doesn't stop at the edge of your skin. You feel the vibration of connection with air, sound, emotion, movement. What you once called my energy was never personal. It was universal energy filtered through the lens of self. As control fades, energy begins to move freely again. What was once suppressed starts to circulate. Emotions that were trapped in tension rise to the surface, not as chaos, but as release. You start to see how every emotion is simply energy seeking movement. Anger becomes fuel for transformation. Sadness becomes depth. Fear becomes awareness sharpening itself. Nothing needs to be fixed. Everything needs to be felt. The dissolution of ego is not a loss, it's liberation. Without the constant story of me, the nervous system no longer clings to protection. The fight or flight impulse begins to rest. You start to experience the body as an instrument of energy rather than a fortress of control. The more awareness expands, the more this energy finds its own balance. Breath deepens, heartbeat steadies, presence grows. The flow that was once blocked by identity becomes a river of vitality. This is the sacred reorganization of consciousness. Energy that once spiraled into anxiety now moves into intuition. What once fueled overthinking now fuels clarity. The system begins to self-heal. You notice that the body knows how to recalibrate if you stop interrupting it. Every vibration of emotion, every pulse of sensation, is part of life's own intelligence, clearing the path. The ego believes peace comes from control, but awareness reveals that peace comes from openness. When the ego loosens, energy no longer has to fight itself. It doesn't need to suppress pain or defend identity. It can finally move as life intended, fluid, intelligent, uninterrupted. In this openness, you no longer generate energy. You are energy. You're not managing flow. You're becoming it. You realize that your presence is not the result of effort, but the expression of alignment. The ego falls silent. The energy sings. Awareness breathes through everything. And what remains is movement. Pure, sacred, unbroken flow. Even as awareness expands, there are moments when old patterns rise like echoes from the past. The shadow begins to surface, the hidden fears, the suppressed emotions, the unmet parts of yourself that have been buried under control. They appear not to harm you, but to be seen. This is the phase of resistance, where everything you try to avoid begins to ask for acknowledgement. It is not regression, it is revelation. The shadow lives in the nervous system as stored energy. The tension you never processed, the grief you never voiced, the fear you never allowed. When control fades, these energies finally have space to move, and their movement can feel uncomfortable, like old storms being released from the body. The ego mistakes this for danger and tries to rebuild its walls. But awareness knows this is cleansing, not collapse. Resistance is the ego's final attempt to preserve itself. It fears being exposed, because exposure feels like death. But the shadow doesn't destroy, it integrates. Every repressed part of you carries energy that, once accepted, becomes power. The anger you denied becomes boundary. The sorrow you resisted becomes empathy. The fear you hid becomes intuition. The shadow is not darkness, it's potential waiting to be reclaimed. As awareness holds these parts without judgment, the nervous system begins to learn a new language. Safety no longer means avoidance, it means presence. You realize that emotion cannot harm you when you don't identify with it. Feeling is not falling, it's freeing. The body, once rigid from suppression, begins to release in waves. Shaking, breathing, crying, all natural ways the system restores flow. The key is not to force healing, but to allow it. You cannot control the rate at which light meets shadow. You can only stay open, breathing through what arises. Resistance softens not by effort, but by permission. The more you let the energy move, the less power the shadow holds. It no longer defines you, it informs you. This is the sacred alchemy of awareness, turning pain into wisdom through observation. When you stop resisting your own depths, you realize that even your shadow was trying to protect you. It learned to control because it once felt unsafe. Now, under the light of consciousness, it doesn't need to. It begins to rest, to dissolve, to return to the flow it was always part of. In facing the shadow, you reclaim the energy once lost to resistance. What was fragmented becomes whole. What was feared becomes integrated. The flow becomes uninterrupted, light and dark moving together, harmony born from honesty. And in that harmony, the illusion of separation fades. You understand now. Resistance was never the enemy. It was the doorway to your own liberation. There comes a moment when the inner turbulence settles. The energy that once surged and resisted now begins to flow smoothly through every layer of your being. This is the phase of release and integration, the merging of awareness and experience into a single current of clarity. Nothing is being forced anymore. Nothing is being denied. The body and consciousness begin to move as one organism, breathing in rhythm with life itself. Release is not an action, it's a happening. It occurs when you stop interfering with what the nervous system already knows how to do. Recalibrate, restore, rebalance. Every tremor, every sigh, every tear is the body's intelligence unclenching. What was once trapped begins to move. What was once fragmented begins to remember its unity. You realize healing was never about becoming something new. It was about removing what obscured what was always whole. Integration follows naturally. The mind stops labeling emotions as good or bad. It starts seeing them as currents of the same river, different expressions of one flow. You no longer reject fear. You listen to it. You no longer suppress grief. You honor it. You no longer chase joy. You allow it to arise and dissolve without clinging. Each emotion becomes information, energy speaking through sensation, guiding you toward balance. As this integration deepens, the nervous system learns trust. It begins to respond to life instead of react. The breath slows, the heart softens, and the space inside you expands. Awareness stabilizes not in escape from feeling, but in intimacy with it. You begin to live from the center, the still point that exists beneath every movement, beneath every change. From that stillness, nothing feels threatening anymore. Everything becomes experience, not identity. This is the wisdom of release, to stop holding what was never yours to carry. The pain, the control, the constant self-surveillance, all of it dissolves when you realize it was only ever resistance to the present moment. The body feels lighter, not because you gained power, but because you surrendered the illusion of needing it. You recognize that power was never in holding, it was always in allowing. Integration is when every part of you, the shadow, the light, the silence, the motion, coexist without conflict. You no longer seek to fix yourself. You begin to trust your wholeness as it is. The inner war ends, and in its place arises a quiet coherence. You feel it in the way you breathe, walk, speak. Everything becomes deliberate, yet effortless. The nervous system, once fractured by control, now vibrates in harmony. The mind no longer demands, it listens. The heart no longer defends, it receives. You move with life, not against it. This is release. This is integration. The moment you stop trying to perfect your energy, it perfects itself. When the flow becomes your natural state, life itself begins to rearrange around your inner coherence. This is transformation in practice. Not a concept, but a living reality. The way you think, move, and respond changes, not through effort, but through alignment. You no longer seek to fix the external, you stabilize the internal. From that stability, your outer world reshapes itself in quiet precision. Every interaction becomes part of the flow. The people who match your new frequency remain. Those who don't begin to drift away. The nervous system, once conditioned by anxiety, now recognizes safety in stillness. You start to experience life as responsiveness instead of reaction. Situations that once triggered panic now pass through you like wind through open space. What used to consume your energy no longer holds weight because you're no longer meeting life from tension. You're meeting it from awareness. Transformation is not about gaining new abilities. It's about losing unnecessary resistance. The less you interfere, the more you align with the intelligence that guides everything. Work becomes effortless because your energy is no longer divided. Relationships deepen because you listen with presence instead of fear. Even ordinary moments begin to carry sacred depth. You stop trying to create meaning and start perceiving the meaning that was always there. The nervous system mirrors this new state. It no longer oscillates between defense and collapse. It rests in regulation, in grounded awareness. Breath becomes your anchor, slow, rhythmic, complete. The body feels lighter because energy flows without interruption. The mind, once an engine of analysis, becomes a lens of perception. Thought no longer dictates reality, it describes it. You are no longer inside your thoughts are inside you. As awareness stabilizes, time itself feels different. There is no more rush, no more scarcity. You realize that patience is not waiting. It is presence without demand. Every moment unfolds as part of a larger harmony, and you begin to trust the invisible choreography behind all things. Decisions arise intuitively. Movement happens without calculation. You no longer fear the unknown because you have become intimate with it. Transformation in practice means living from wholeness. You don't need to retreat from the world to stay peaceful. Your peace travels with you. The noise of life no longer pulls you out of center because you know that stillness is not the absence of sound. It's the awareness that hears it. You can walk through chaos and remain untouched, not because you are distant, but because you are deeply connected. This is what happens when control dissolves completely. Action flows from awareness. Speech flows from truth. Movement flows from clarity. You live not as a separate self-managing existence, but as existence expressing itself effortlessly. Life becomes a meditation in motion, simple, direct, and whole. When all effort fades, what remains is stillness. Not silence as emptiness, but silence as fullness. The end of control reveals the beginning of peace. The mind, once obsessed with movement, begins to rest inside awareness itself. There's no longer anything to chase, nothing to prove, nothing to maintain. You realize that all striving was a way of postponing this moment, the simple presence of being alive without interference. Stillness is not the opposite of action. It is the space from which all action arises. It is the rhythm beneath rhythm, the pause between breaths, the consciousness that watches both motion and rest without attachment. When you rest here, life doesn't stop. It continues moving, but you are no longer swept away by it. You see the unfolding of events as part of a single dance, energy moving through infinite forms, returning again and again to quiet awareness. In this stillness, the nervous system finally finds home. The tension that once served as armor dissolves into safety. The body feels light, grounded, alive. The mind no longer needs to analyze or control the moment, because the moment itself is enough. You sense a deeper intelligence breathing through you. The same intelligence that once carried you through surrender now carries you through serenity. The return to stillness is not withdrawal from life. It's participation without resistance. You no longer grasp at what passes or fear what's to come. The present moment becomes vast, spacious, eternal. Within it, there's room for everything: joy and sorrow, light and shadow, birth and ending. You stop labeling experiences as blessings or burdens because you see that all of them serve the same purpose: awakening consciousness to itself. This is where control loses its meaning. You can feel that nothing real has ever been in your possession, and nothing real can ever be lost. The people, the moments, the emotions, all waves rising and falling in the same ocean of awareness. Stillness doesn't reject the waves. It knows they are made of itself. Every experience returns to this quiet center, dissolving back into presence, leaving no residue. Here, you no longer seek flow, because you have become it. You no longer seek peace because you are resting as it. The awareness that observes every thought, every sound, every breath is untouched by them all. It watches life move through infinite forms, knowing that what is eternal never moves at all. Stillness is the final realization, the understanding that you are never separate from the intelligence guiding everything. You are not the river trying to find the sea. You are the sea remembering its own movement. Control fades into harmony. Effort dissolves into presence, and in that timeless quiet, life continues to flow through you, as you, without resistance, without end.